Thank you. Thank you so much, Joe. And greetings. As Joe said, I'm Margaret Kimberley, and I'm speaking to you from New York City. And I am the executive editor of blackagendareport.com, as well as a member of the leadership bodies of the United National Antiwar Coalition, UNAC, our host, and of the Black Alliance for Peace. As a NATO summit is set to take place in The Hague next week, I was very eager to participate in this UNAC webinar to say that for the sake of humanity, NATO must be abolished, which means imperialism must be abolished. In the last few days, it's as if time has stopped as we watched first Israel attacking Iran and Iran's response. The purported reason for the military action was to stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapons capability. But that is a ruse, meant to cover up for the fact that the destruction of the Iranian state has been part of U.S. foreign policy doctrine for many years. It is sad but true that the U.S. has succeeded in eliminating one state in that region after another, from Iraq to Libya to Syria, and given U.S. ally Israel greater power than ever. These are NATO issues, and they involve countries like the UK, which provide aid, intelligence support, and diplomatic cover, which prevents Israel from being treated as the war criminal nation that it is. Despite what I was told my whole life about the benevolent nature of NATO, the member nations of that organization have committed many crimes during my lifetime, ranging from the destruction of the state of Yugoslavia to the destruction of Libya and the destabilization of governments around the world. This structure is a means of giving the U.S. and its junior partners military and political power over the people of the world. In other words, NATO is an integral tool of imperialism. It's interesting that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization has made the South American nation of Colombia a, quote, global partner, unquote. NATO has also claimed Africa as part of its, quote, southern neighborhood, unquote. Of course, we can also ask why there is a U.S. military presence in South America or Africa at all. But there are more than 800 U.S. and NATO military bases around the world. The Black Alliance for Peace campaign, Zone of Peace in Our Americas, is organizing around the upcoming NATO summit with the call to action against NATO and its U.S. SOUTHCOM command on June 24th and 25th through teach-ins, political education, and actions to demand NATO out of our Americas. At zoneofpeace.org, there's more information on how to join the U.S. NATO Out of Our Americas network. When NATO was founded in 1949, much of the global South was still under colonial control. The US and European nations such as Britain, France, Portugal, the Netherlands, Italy, and Belgium, which colonized most of the world, were all founding members. In Africa, these nations colluded for years to prevent the continent from being liberated. In the early 1950s, they held conferences there, inviting apartheid South Africa and what was then Rhodesia, along with the U.S. In 1967, the then recently ousted president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, ousted in a Western coup, reported that there were at least 17 air bases, 9 foreign naval bases, 3 rocket sites, and an atomic testing range operated by NATO in North Africa, in addition to military missions in about a dozen other African countries, not to mention the exploitation of raw materials for the production of nuclear weapons occurring in the mines of Congo, Angola, South Africa, and what was Rhodesia. NATO should be a relic of the Cold War, which supposedly ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. We were told that the world needed NATO for protection against the USSR and its Warsaw Pact allies. By that logic, NATO should have ceased to exist. But instead, it's only grown in size. Since 1999, former Warsaw Pact states such as Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, and the Czech Republic joined NATO, as have former Soviet republics Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, along with the new states created from the destruction of Yugoslavia. Slovenia, North Macedonia, Montenegro, and Croatia, along with Albania, have all joined NATO. In addition, Sweden and Finland joined in recent years and gave up the neutrality that kept their countries safe and joined the dangerous and forever escalating proxy war in Ukraine. Colonial control is still the driver behind NATO's existence, and global South nations are not the only ones being colonized. Trump is as strong a supporter of NATO as any other U.S. president. He differs only in publicly demanding that member nations spend more money on their militaries, and they do just that. In Canada, Mark Carney, the recently elected prime minister, announced that he would immediately meet the 2% of GDP threshold for military spending for NATO nations. Oddly enough, Carney claimed that a supposedly frayed relationship with the U.S. drove his decision-making. One would think that if Canada wanted to, as he put it, chart a new course, it would lower defense spending and disconnect itself from Washington's dictates. But instead, it ties itself to NATO even as it claims to be changing the relationship. Like Canada, Europeans live under ever-worsening austerity as a result of meeting U.S. military spending demands, with their once strong welfare state safety nets being weakened as a result of expenditures on war-making. Of course, military spending is more than half of all budget expenditures in the U.S., and people here suffer as their needs go unmet. We've recently seen escalations in Ukraine as Western nations openly said they would extend their attacks into Russia. The recent strikes against Russian military assets was highly provocative, but was supported by and cheered on by the U.S. and its partners. The Western strikes against Russia foretold what was to come in Iran. The U.S. pretended to be negotiating a new nuclear agreement in good faith, all the while giving Israel the go-ahead and pretending, as Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, that Israel took, as he put it, unilateral action and that the U.S. was not involved. Of course, Israel would not act without U.S. approval or help, and Trump, being Trump, couldn't keep up the pretense and openly bragged about knowing the date of the attack. As I said, he differs only in saying what other presidents would keep to themselves. NATO is an offensive force, one that continues feeding the military-industrial complex and depriving people of their rights to self-determination. The U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, and all of the U.S. military command structures are designed to do just that. There's been conjecture about whether Trump will keep AFRICOM as a standalone command or include it as part of the European Command, which was the case before 2008. But the question is actually irrelevant. U.S. policy towards Africa will not change. The goal is to keep African nations weak with compromised leaders who will do the West's bidding. That is why the Alliance of Sahel States and the leadership of interim President Captain Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso are viewed as such a threat. True independence for African and other peoples is not in the interests of the collective West. The same is true in Western Asia, where the goal of U.S. primacy remains unchanged. That is why the destruction of the Syrian state was such a great tragedy, a classic CIA operation which destroyed it from within and weakened it enough to put the Western jihadist proxies in power and include Syria as part of the Greater Israel Project, increasing the likelihood of a successful attack on the Iranian state. All eyes must be on Iran, as I believe the events of this week are only the beginning of the years-long U.S.-NATO plotting against that country. So we must say no to NATO and no to imperialism, which wreak havoc from Northern Europe to Southern Africa. The existence of humanity and the planet depend upon our opposition to this dangerous structure. Thank you. Thank you very much.